So, way back in the day, I spent a ton of time in music school practicing this exercise. That was, of course, classic thirds and sevenths through the first couple bars of a B-flat blues. Now, the question for today is, was that time well spent, or is there an even more foundational harmonic concept that I should have been investing time in the practice room? What's up, everyone? Thanks for tuning in this week. I'm going to make it easy for you. Despite the hot take sort of nature of the title of this video, I don't want you to stop practicing thirds and sevenths. They're incredibly important for us as improvisers. They define most of the harmony that we need. So if you've got the root, just the third and the seventh, you kind of know what's going on for the most part in the chord. In fact, a piano player oftentimes might just play thirds and sevenths in their left hand, especially if they were soloing on top of that. They're also incredibly important for understanding how voice leading works and how these sort of internal moving voices push harmony forward. So it's not about forgetting those things. Instead, it's just about realizing how many melodic and harmonic options are available to you if you just think about the triads of the chords and what we can do with triads. So I know you're probably thinking, Sean, triads are lame. They're inside, they're consonant, there's no tension, there's no color. I would really beg to differ. When we think about these things, we really got to think about how they build melodies. And tons of melodies use lots of notes from the triads. They're very simple to approach. So if we're thinking about a complex set of chord changes, we just really need to know, am I major, minor, I guess diminished and augmented as well, but really for the most part, major and minor, so they can really help to clarify some of your thought process on these chords. If you're just getting this stuff together, you need to know the triads because they're part of the seventh chord. So if you're playing C dominant 7, you need to know that it's a C, an E, a G before you even worry about that seventh chord. If you're a little further down the path, triads can be a great way to introduce some extra color to the chord as you think about maybe sticking one type of triad on top of a different chord. Now, we're going to get that whole approach today, but they're really powerful tools. And if you want to go in that direction, you've got to have some good triadic language together. So when you try to kind of superimpose them on top of other shapes, you're not just sort of like doing it because you think it's going to sound hip. You actually have melodic ideas that are sort of extending that harmony. So if you've come along with me this far that you actually should be really interested in triads, let's talk about what we actually want to practice on this stuff. Now, if you don't know the triads, that's where you got to start. We're not really going to dig into that today. Work on major, minor, diminished, augmented, all that sort of good stuff. We really want to know the next step. For me, as with so many of these theoretical concepts, it's actually about building ideas with the theory rather than just being able to like rip the chord up and down your horn. To see this in action, let's just look at a couple ideas. So this is one that I find myself playing all the time. Okay, this idea does have one extra note and it does have an E flat. We'll get to that in a second. But at its core, it's really just a B flat triad, the root, the third, the fifth. Those notes in B flat. We're descending down the arpeggio. Now we do have this extra E flat in there. So you could think about it in a couple ways. Maybe the actual like triad idea is a root, third, fourth, and fifth. So it's like a triadic shape with a little bit of extra stuff in there. Or if you prefer, and this is probably more how I think about it, I think it's just a B flat triad with a passing note in it that passes between the F to the D natural to connect those two chord tones. You take a simple idea like this. In this case, I'm going to throw it on a little bit of an example of a blues, and it sounds great. So you can see how this triadic concept works well on a simple tune. What about on a more complicated tune? That's where I think it actually really shines. Let's look at the first couple bars of the Benny Golson tune, Stablemates. This is a relatively dense tune from a harmonic standpoint. Lots of stuff going on, and it's also usually played relatively fast. When we take all that stuff together, rather than piling complex ideas on a complex set of chord changes at a fast tempo, that can lead to sort of murkiness of ideas. If we think about how we can simplify ideas to actually get just the essence of what we need to hit these changes, it can really be effective. Now, I'm not saying don't play other stuff. I'm just saying you want to have this at your disposal. So if we look at these chord changes, the first couple bars are E minor to A7, E flat minor to A flat 7, resolving to D flat major 7, and then a C7 chord that's usually altered. So we do have 2 5s at the beginning of this. We have a 2 5 where it's E to A, then a 2 5 E flat to A flat. I would argue that you could totally play 2 5s and that would sound great, but it's also really effective to have some triadic shapes that you can use on those two chords. Using just that triadic idea of the minor triad plus one extra note, in this case the fourth of each one of those, for that entire measure, the entire 2/5 measure, is really, really effective and can give great clarity and direction to your ideas at this fast tempo. Now, those are some really specific examples, but you can take this entire approach and apply it to an entire tune. Again, thinking both on simple and complex tunes. What if we took an entire chorus of B-flat blues and really only stuck with mostly triadic ideas and a little bit of blues stuff? Really no bebop, no thirds and sevenths, not really concerning ourselves with those sort of melodic and voice leading gestures, but really just concerning ourselves with primary chord tones and playing the blues. At least to my ear, that is really, really effective and definitely one of the sort of gears you want to be able to access in your soloing. Maybe you don't play the entire solo like that, but that gives you a lot more melodic direction than just doing a thirds and sevenths exercise would. Now, if we move to a little more complicated tune, something like the Sam Rivers tune Beatrice, this is a set of chord changes that doesn't rely so much on 2/5-1s or those type of movements. So thirds and sevenths might not really help us quite as much on this sort of tune. Triads and basic shapes like this, where you're really thinking about the voice leading that is within the triad from chord to chord, can be really, really useful. And then when you add some other stuff in here, maybe some bebop ideas, maybe some chords with some extensions, they are really going to pop because everything else is so kind of focused on the primary chunks of the chord. Remember, it's not just about like, oh, I'm going to play a 9 in every chord because it's hip. That's actually kind of a lame way to think about it. It's all about building melodies and using those tools of sometimes consonant notes, sometimes slightly tension-filled notes like 9s, maybe sometimes very tension-filled notes like sharp 11s, to your advantage to build your solo rather than just to play them just because they kind of seem like they should be hip. There you go. Triads. Really, really important. Really basic, but incredibly important. You can get a ton of mileage out of these. And like I said, it's not really an either-or situation. Do I practice triads or do I practice thirds and sevenths? It's a both and. You should have ways to use both kind of areas of the harmony, both ways of creating movement, creating melody, creating voice leading through changes at your disposal to make yourself a complete musician and a complete improviser. Cool. We'll see you in the woodshed.